What's up, everybody? Mr. here talking U.S. History, Chapter 17. We talked about last chapter about how the United States started to assert itself and become a world power and a global player on the world stage. This chapter, we're going to talk about some good times and some bad times being in the United States. The time we're talking about here is 1914, 1933, almost 20 years here. We got major events like World War I. We got New Deal, stock market crash, and big things are happening and being done by Americans. Let's start off with the Great War. And we're not going to go much in depth in this. We did that in world history. But World War I was considered to be the Great War. It started in Europe in 1914 and lasted for 4 years and was one of the biggest wars in history. European nations looking for power, just like we talked about last chapter. They had lots of secret alliances or agreements to help each other, which meant that once one country waged war or declared war on another, that these other secret alliances became out in the open, and they also declared war on each other. Right? There were two groups primarily. We had Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy, which made up the Central Powers, and that's the beginning. Eventually, Italy would change sides. Britain, France, and Russia were the Allied powers. Eventually, the United States would join the Allied powers. So these were the two sides. The war started because in 1914, Austria-Hungary was the big controlling nation, and Serbia wanted freedom. And Austria-Hungary's Archduke Franz Ferdinand took a trip to Sarajevo, and him and his wife were assassinated by a man named Galipo Princip and the Black Hand. Austria-Hungary eventually declared war on Serbia, which brought out all of the secret alliances that were put in place, and Russia declaring war on Germany, Germany declaring war on Russia, Germany declaring war on France. Eventually, we got ourselves a world war. Fighting in World War was very bloody, very brutal. They fought in trenches for the first time. There were lots of new weapons that were used during this time, like machine guns. Airplanes were used in battle for the first time. Poisonous gas was used on the ground. Submarines were used at sea and sank lots of ships. One of the worst battles was the Battle of the Somme, which lasted for 4.5 months. And more than 1 million soldiers died or were injured in just that battle by itself. So very bloody, very devastating war. And at first, the United States stayed neutral, or at least they stayed out of the fighting. They were, however, giving lots of supplies to Britain and to France. And it was that closeness to Great Britain that pulled a lot of Americans into wanting to join the war. But ultimately, one of the main reasons why the United States got involved in the war was that Germany began using submarines to sink supply ships. And when they started sinking United States ships, the United States decided to join the war on the side of the British in 1970. The government of Great Britain was more democratic than that of Germany. And this was another reason that President Woodrow Wilson told Americans why they were entering the wars, because they wanted to make the world safe for democracy. But there still are people in the United States that did not want to go to war. And so the United States government had to use propaganda to help make fighting the war a more popular idea. And propaganda is where governments, you know, advertise basically to try to get people to think what they want to think. And so here's some examples of propaganda that was used in the United States at this time. This first one there on the left, you see a lot of German soldiers pointing guns at a man with what looks to be his family begging in the background from not to shoot him. Another man on the ground already being shot with the tagline of, "Will you fight now or you wait for this?" Basically insinuating that if Germany was to win, they would come to the United States and do this. You got the famous "I want you" for the U.S. Army, Uncle Sam there, pointing at him, arms. And all right, you got your step in line, step into your place where you got your judges, your farmers, your business people. Okay? All of them start off as regular citizens at the beginning of the picture, and as the picture goes on, the people turn into soldiers. So it's trying every man, doesn't matter what walk of life you are from, you step into your place in the army. Okay? This wasn't only geared towards men. Okay? There was propaganda that would encourage men to help with the war efforts by, cooking from home or sewing more clothes or buying government bonds so that the government get more money so for the war effort. They also would depict Germans as guerrillas or brutes, that they were destroying freedom and democracy. Okay? And you had to have to destroy this mad brute so that your freedom, your democracy would continue, and your way of life would stay the same. Okay? And finally, they would also try to appeal to one's manhood, where you see they got a picture of a woman there saying, "Gee, I wish I were a man. If I was, I'd join the Navy." So saying that even this wanted to join the Navy, and that if men didn't want to, they were kind of less manly. So there are lots of propaganda being used by the United States to encourage Americans to support the war effort at this time. So America, when they got into the war, they were only there for a very short time, but they definitely helped change the direction of the war. They got in when Russia was exiting, and they were a perfect ally for Germany and France, sending fresh new soldiers there and lots of supplies. And their help brought an end to the war, which ended with Germany surrendering and signing the Treaty of Versailles. This was a very harsh peace treaty. It took away Germany's air force, most of its navy and army. Germany had to pay huge fines, and they took sole responsibility for the war, greatly dismantling their economy, humiliating Germany, angering their citizens, and to look ahead a little bit, it would be this humiliation, this anger, this poor economy that would lead to another world war, but that's a discussion for another. So after World War One ends, all soldiers come home, and at least in the United States, the U.S. economy was booming. Okay, people were dancing to new songs. Americans were making more money, and they were spending that money. This was really good times in the United States, and it was known as the Roaring Twenties, a time where many happy and hopeful changes took place in the United States, and mostly because while they did fight in World War One, fighting was not done in their country, so they did not experience the devastation or the realities of war that many European countries did. Um, so it was a happy time in the United States. some things that were going on, the good things, lots of Americans were buying cars. Roads started to cover America. Um, Women eventually won the right to vote in 1920, which was huge. Baseball becomes America's pastime, with Babe Ruth really being the poster boy for America and for baseball at the time. Okay? Uh, Jazz music became very popular. Listening to it, dance club and nightclub, dance music, jazz music, and that was a very popular thing too. And Charles Lindbergh, there in the bottom right, became the first person to fly across the Atlantic Ocean. So, improvements in airplanes and aviation was occurring, and people were taking longer and longer flights. But even though all these good things were happening, um, things weren't great for everybody during the 1920s. Farmers were having tough times. Um, Not only that, but credit cards became the first time that credit was being used was during the 1920s, and people were buying things that they didn't necessarily have the money to buy them with. And this led to a huge downturn in 1929, where things got very bad very fast for almost everyone in the entire country. So we're going to talk about the stock market crash. Many companies are owned by people. Okay? They share pieces of the company, and this is called stocks. And if you own stock or you own parts of the company, um, then you make money off that company, and you're also investing in that company. Some people own a few stock, others have many, some have none. Okay, during the 1920s, it was all relatively new, and with all this money, people were buying and selling stocks in the stock market. Okay, in the 1920s, stock prices were high. That means the companies were doing well. They were putting. It was a good investment to buy stocks in companies. So people bought and sold a lot of stocks. Then all of a sudden, one day in 1929, those prices came humbling down all at once. No one wanted to buy stocks anymore. They tried to get all of their money out. They tried to sell as much as they could. Companies lost lots of money. Millions of regular people went broke. It was one of the biggest financial losses in history, and it all came on one day in 1920. Okay, this event was kind of a kickstart to the Great Depression. It was starting a little bit before that, but when the stock market crashed, it really set the country into this Great Depression. As many as 1 out of every 4 workers were unemployed, and the depression not only was felt here in the United States, but spread in many parts of the world throughout the 1930s. So, some of the bad things that were going on, right? Millions of workers had jobs. You see a young boy there begging for someone to give his dad a job. With those workers losing their jobs, they also lost their homes, and so people would end up living in shanty towns, which were makeshift towns made out of plywood or tents, as you see there in the picture. People were hungry; they could not afford food. So this is where soup kitchens or bread kitchens came up, and people would line up to get a bowl of soup from charities or churches or things like that. And also, one thing that happened were that banks failed. Okay, uh, this is where people kept their money and thought that it was safe. So many people trying to get their money out at one time, these ended up out of money and had to close, and people lost money that they were saving or keeping safe in the bank. So this bred a lot of mistrust in the institution of banking. United States. Also during this time, there was a terrible drought in the Great Plains. Okay? This created a huge disaster time in the Great Plains states. Terrible dust storms with these huge clouds of dust would just be whipped up by wind and pushed all over the plains, which would ruin the farmland, would blow away the dirt that they used to farm and making the area impossible to plant crops, uh, and which would, further harm the livelihood of all the farmers that lived out there. Because of these dust storms, this became known as the Dust Bowl. So something had to be done to help the country get out of this Great Depression. President Herbert Hoover, who was in charge when the Great Depression happened, tried to make things better, but their efforts really only made it worse. It wasn't until 1933 when Franklin D. Roosevelt was elected as the new president. He had this great line where he told people that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And he got work on trying to help the economy get better and Americans get out of the depression. So he took action very swiftly and he set up brand new government programs to pull the country out of the depression. And before President Roosevelt, there's a lot of belief that the government should not be involved too much in economics, in the economy. But President Roosevelt had a vision and he had a new deal for America. So all of these programs that he made were part of this New Deal that gets credited to President Roosevelt. And eventually, the economy did get better. So some of the things that he did in this New Deal, they made new laws to change how banks work so that people's money would stay safe inside banks. New government programs were created so that they could give people jobs. Okay? This included building airports, building bridges, building roads, and all of these government agencies hired new workers to do those construction jobs, putting lots of money into people's hands that needed it. Okay? And those people who weren't working jobs were given aid directly from the government. So money was given to people who were out of work, who did not have to buy homes, did not have any to buy food. They were given money directly. This was one of the first times that happened. And also, Social Security was set up during this time. So taxes were put on all workers, and the money that they got from that was set into accounts to help people when they retired or they stopped work. So all of these things helped the economy come out of the depression and helped Americans when they really needed it. Okay? And that sets up our time for the United States pulling out of the Great Depression and entering into World War II, which we'll talk about next week. But while you guys are at home, there is really good course videos on this topic. Obviously, on World War I, if you want to look at what happened during that time, the war, get that one out. If there wasn't any we're going to watch, I would go to Roaring Twenties and the Great Depression. Those to give a good contrast of how life was during this time in America. And then if you're interested in New Deal, a lot into politics, but they have that one as well. So thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys next week.